So today I want to make a video about losing or rather giving up top position in order to get a submission, in order to chase a submission. Now, when I was coming up, there was this thing that people used to say, which is position before submission. Now, I understand that this is maybe slightly outdated. People today talk a lot about this idea of control. The bridge between the position and the submission is always the control. So there's no problem per se in giving up some position in order to chase a submission, insofar as there is always present an element of control. And I think one of the best examples to see this in practice is from the front headlock, or from any sort of chest to back in front of the elbows, right? So chest lock, front headlocks, katagatame grips, all this sort of game. And very often you see people teaching, and indeed athlete performing, positions that from chest to back in front of the elbow, you see like this position which Bodoni is right now, you sort of give up this top position, which, as a matter of fact, this is top position. You have head height, you have hip height on your partner, to start chasing a submission. Very often they tend to be either guillotines or some variation of DARS, katagatame grips, right? So arm triangles, right? Now, you see this people teaching this a lot, and you see athletes performing this a lot. And I wanted to go over a few scenarios, and I want to emphasize the fact that I don't tend to teach this strategy to beginners, and we're going to look at this at the end of the video, why I tend to emphasize a different approach for beginners. Now, we have here Bodoni, classic. This is very classic Bodoni. He was playing guard, he was on bottom, now he heisted up, and now he's chest to back in front of the elbows, right? And now you would think he's already winning, right? There are 2 minutes on the clock, and he could just opting for a go behind and maybe starting chasing the back, right? You would think it seems like a reasonable way of operating. Instead, he decides to lock. You see, this is a very classic guillotine setup. We're not going to go into the sort of nitty-gritty of the guillotines, but he was trying to do a go behind. His partner kind of reached for his back, for his hip, sorry, and now he's electing to sit back instead of fighting for longer, as it were, for this go behind, in which he would end up getting chest to back behind the elbows, turtle, ref position, any of those things. He elected to sit back, as in deliberately relinquish top hip position and this chest to back in front of the elbows, to sit there chasing the guillotine, right? And he does so punching a hook in, and uses this kind of momentum to sweep his partner, his opponent. And there's a little bit of scramble. Eventually, once again, you can see here, instead of staying up, he deliberately elects, you see here, he could have just kind of get rid of this, kind of sprawled his leg back and established sort of top position with chest to back in front of the elbow. Instead, he elects for sitting. You see, kind of he slides his left leg through, blocks his opponent's leg here so that he cannot jump across, and indeed gives up, kind of sits back to guard with a locked submission in, and indeed that's how he's going to get the tap. Super tight guillotine, close guard, and then his opponent taps. Amazing, right? He had top position, gives up top position deliberately, and gets an amazing tap. This is by the way, this is a tap that won his whole team the event. Now, let's move on. This is a situation, this is Kainan at ADCC. He had a perfect run, submitted every single match. And this is an amazing position that he has against this Moody. We're not going to go into to the nitty-gritty. I just want to highlight the strategy here. You see, again, he has chest to back in front of the elbows, right, with this sort of front headlock kind of grip. And now he deliberately elects to sit to chase the submission, right? Obviously, there's 0-0. He's been kind of dominating the whole match, and he wants to get a tap. Great. So he gives up the submission, he gives up top position, and the submission must be already pretty tight. Obviously, Kainan is a guillotine specialist. And so Moody does something very smart, which is deliberately giving up top position in order to defend the submission. And indeed, that's how it looks. You see, now Moody he's already noticing the pressure of the guillotine. And one of the guillotine defense, or the last stitches defense, is to just lay your back onto the mat, as sort of lying down. It can be hard to finish guillotine against a fully sort of lying down opponent. And indeed, Kainan uses the threat of guillotine to gain top position, and unfortunately for Moody, it's just too tight, and eventually he ends up getting a tap. Okay? Again, it seems like having deliberately relinquished top position seems like it worked perfectly. Let's look at yet another very similar scenario. We have here Rafael Lovato, once again, just the back in front of the elbow, sits back, and uses the threat of a guillotine. There you go. Now the guillotine, if Patrick Gaudio were not to react to this guillotine threat, he would probably get finished right here. Okay, the guillotine seems pretty tight. Patrick Gaudio does something pretty smart, because this leg is preventing him from jumping across, and he says, well, you know what, I'm just going to lay my back onto the mat and see if I can get out. There you go. Deliberately giving up bottom mount. Unfortunately, once again, the guillotine is too tight, and he ends up tapping. Okay? Here we have Felipe Pena against Moody again. Poor Moody. It's not coming out well of this video. He's an amazing player. Once again, with chest back in front of the elbow, and Pena sits back into a guillotine. And once again, you see, Moody deliberately gives up top position in order to escape the tap. And he kind of manages to roll once again, but eventually the guillotine is too tight and he ends up tapping. Okay? Now you look at this and you think, well, that's great. I have chest back in front of the elbow. I get a good bite on my partner's neck. I sit and I get the tap. Worst case scenario, my partner reacts to the submission threat, deliberately gives up top position, and I come on top in mount, half guard chest to chest, whatever the case might be, right? And maybe I finish the match, maybe I don't, but it doesn't matter. I had an amazing submission threat, and now I'm in a very dominant position. You look at this on paper, you look at the match, you may even look at the statistics, and you think, well, that's the way to go, isn't it? I don't think that you, as a beginner, I don't think that should be your way to go. And in the next sequence, we're going to look at why. Now, here we are Michael Pixel, we're with Cyborg, right, with Abreu. You can see very similar situation. Like Pixley has a front headlock, has a katagatame grip. He already submitted someone with this configuration in a previous match. He already submitted Merigali, although it wasn't exactly like this. He already submitted someone else. And, katagatame is one of his specialties. And so he starts getting the bite, and eventually you will see he starts forcing Cyborg down. Cyborg doesn't accept the position, comes back up, and Pixley says, well, you know what? I'm going to keep chasing the submission, and I'm going to deliberately sit kind of underneath my opponent to see if I can get a tap. Why wouldn't he do that? Except Cyborg manages to jump across. Now, again, this is not exactly a guillotine instructional, but whenever a guillotine happens cross body, as in whenever my opponent's head is on the opposite side of my center line with respect to my opponent's body, there's no guillotines, right? In other words, for a guillotine to happen, you have to have the head and the hips and the body on the same side of the center line. You see, if this is Pixley's center line, Cyborg's head and Cyborg's body are on the left side of Pixley's center line. What Cyborg is going to want to do is going to want to jump across so that his body is going to be somewhere here, while his head is going to still somewhere here, right? So cross-body guillotine are not a thing, and Cyborg knows that really well. He starts jumping across, and here we are. Now we're approaching a cross-body scenario, right? The head is still on the left side of Pixley, but the body is on his right side. You see Pixley's trying to get in guard back. Cyborg knows really where he wants to go, and you see here now he's fully cross-body, and he keeps walking, circling, and until there you go. This is a full cross-body. Now his head is on the left side, his whole body is on the right side. Now Pixley tries a desperate attempt, but it's just not going to work. Okay, now Cyborg is basically inside control. At this point, Pixley is basically just kind of holding his head. This is the sequence that lost Pixley the match. Now, in my experience, and of course it's highly subjective, but I think you might be familiar with this experience as well if you're a beginner, that you are on top, you chase a submission, and you end up somewhere here. Okay, with your partner basically inside control, you're still holding your partner's head for your life, you're just getting tired, your arms are getting tired, eventually your partner kind of opens up the lock and you're just in bottom position and you're exhausted because, well, you think this is not exhausting. So in my experience, guillotine exchanges, whenever you have top position, as in front to back, chest to back, in front of the elbows, somewhere here, right? And you deliberately relinquish top position to chase a submission, in my experience, for beginners, they end up somewhere here. More often than not, you're going to find yourself where Pixley is, rather than where, Kainan is, or Bodoni is, or where, Lovato is. Okay? This is my 2 cents. I believe that if you're a beginner and you find yourself in a chest to back in front of the elbows, either you start attacking a submission so that it will always grant you top position, and this is what Michael here is trying to do. Here, this is how the position actually starts, and sorry, before that. There you go, this is how the position starts. You see, he's trying to break Cyborg down so that he can keep top position. So this is a great strategy if you're a beginner. Try always to keep top position. Or the other strategies is obviously start go behind, which we're going to talk about in another video. But essentially what you want to do is basically to go from chest to back in front of the elbows to chest to back behind the elbows, right? And occupy this space somewhere here, right? Because, and I say this again, in my experience, for beginners, exchanges that start like this, and in which the top player deliberately gives up top position to chase a submission, they tend to end somewhere like here. Okay? So, this is my analysis. When should you do what Kainan is doing, what Felipe is doing, what Bodoni is doing? Well, I believe you should chase a submission at the cost of giving up head height and hip height if either you are damn sure you're going to get the tap, as in, you're a guillotine specialist, but obviously as a beginner it's going to be pretty hard for you to be a guillotine specialist, because it's going to be hard for you to be a specialist at anything, because you're a beginner, right? It's the whole point. So if you're a beginner specialist, sure, by all means, right? These people are all very, very good at guillotine, and so they feel confident enough to lose top position in order to chase the submission. Great, do that. The other scenario in which I would definitely recommend someone to lose top position to chase a submission is if you were down on points and there were 30 seconds on the clock, right? So if the situations here were reversed, if Giancarlo were to lose points by points, then sure, maybe with 2 minutes, maybe I wouldn't. I'd probably still recommend a go behind, because there's plenty of time to start taking the back and scoring big points. But if we're talking about, you're losing 2-0 and there's 30 seconds on the clock, sure, then just go for a guillotine, because no matter what you're going to do, you need a quick submission, right? And the quickest submission, if you're in a front headlock, if you're somewhere here, the quickest submission is definitely the guillotine, right? It's definitely not trying to go behind and punch hooks in. That's definitely not the quickest way to a submission. Okay, the quickest way is definitely to sit and tap. So unless you're a guillotine specialist, and unless you have 30 seconds on the clock and you're losing by points, as a beginner, I would never recommend to lose top position to chase the submission. okay? Because more likely than not, you're going to end up somewhere where Michael is, okay?